Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this game's worth your time and bandwidth.
Today's game is the Silent Hill 2 Remake. Maligned by fans from its conception, the remake of the best horror game ever is finally here. Did Bloober deliver? Well, let's find out. Silent Hill 2 Remake is a horror survival game which, like the original, focuses heavily on its atmosphere and story. Story-wise, this is nearly identical to the original. James Sunderland gets a letter from his dead wife Mary saying she's waiting for him in Silent Hill, so he goes there and into a world of nightmares. There's a handful of other characters there for equally depressing reasons, and their stories play out in parallel to James's. Bloober does add a handful of new scenes along the way to better solidify James's relationship, particularly with Angela and Maria, though the major story beats don't change, and it goes without saying that most of the script is also new. Gameplay has seen the biggest mix-up. The game is now entirely behind the back third person, which apparently even the original creator said he preferred on Twitter, which allows for a more immersive Silent Hill, though I do miss some of the cinematic Dutch angles. Silent Hill is also much larger, and you can explore several shops for supplies, as well as knock out glass windows to explore, basically replacing the random stuff found on the sidewalk in the original. This is in addition to a handful of new, quote, modern traversal mechanics. No Nathan Drake climbing or anything, but you do shimmy under and through some stuff. It's worth mentioning this game is gorgeous, and Bloober does a good job inserting small horror scenarios that provide scares, with the town itself being incredibly detailed and full of lore notes for those who explore. Combat is also a big change. James can fight in melee, including a small dodge, or go Leon Kennedy with some third-person shooting. I was a bit worried this would ruin the helplessness feeling of the first game, but it absolutely does not, mostly because the enemies in this game are absolutely brutal. They hit hard, have reasonably smart AI tactics, and love to hide in corners to ambush you. You never feel quite in control, especially since fights are much harder to avoid, making the overall affair considerably more tense. In terms of the gameplay loop, it is still the same. You'll explore more open Silent Hill, solving exploration puzzles to guide you where to go next, then complete a more compact, semi-linear zone with both a normal and nightmare variant. It's worth noting that not only have almost all the puzzles been remixed, mostly for the better, but the game is quite a bit longer. Think at least 50% more added to each section. I could say more, but that's the general gist. The original Silent Hill 2 review goes into a bit more detail, but this remake does its best to not deviate too far from what made that game memorable while modernizing its mechanics and presentation. So what do I like about the Silent Hill 2 remake? Well, the atmosphere here absolutely nails that Silent Hill feel, something other Western games never really properly emulated. I'll go so far as to say I feel like the updated visuals actually make the game considerably scarier and much more uncomfortable. I had to take breaks, which hasn't happened since Resident Evil 7. Additionally, I like the combat improvements, mostly. While purists may bemoan it being less clunky, it definitely adds a level of tension the original didn't have, as enemies, as mentioned, are actually very dangerous now. And lastly, I thought they did well by the story, particularly James's voice actor absolutely nailing his part. While there are still a few things that didn't land completely, let's be real, the first game's story was pretty janky too. And overall, the remake gave me the same emotional payouts and punches without compromise, which is ultimately what I wanted. When it comes to the bad, I get that this is a modern AAA game, though they had to increase the length, but it does negatively affect the game's story pacing, with things moving even more glacially, to the point where some puzzle areas actually started to drag. It also makes the limited number of enemy types more noticeable. Additionally, there are a handful of story elements, mostly around Angela, that were changed or added onto that I felt overplayed their hand. My main gripe with Bloober's other games is their complete lack of subtlety, and while generally I think they did okay, it makes the scenes where they went a little too far pretty jarring. And lastly, the PC version has some serious stuttering issues, and the PS5 version's performance mode is very poor. I found quality PS5 fine most of the time, but it is one of those Unreal 5 engine things, and once again it sucks. As you know, I rate games on a 3-point scale. Must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. And I was a naysayer, but I am a big enough man here to eat crow. The Silent Hill 2 remake is masterfully done, accomplishing the near impossible task of emulating the feel and story of one of the most beloved games ever. It's also a true remake in that it stands on its own and is confident enough to do its own things, meaning it doesn't replace the original, but instead complements it. I've never been happier to be proven wrong, and I highly recommend checking this remake out if you have any affinity for horror games or games with well-told stories.